Hi, my name is Kelly Frantz-Langford, and I'm very excited to share my EAT portfolio activities with you. I decided to start on this screen because I think you'll see the subsequent work that I share really aligns with my affiliate style of leadership in supporting my staff to do their best work. And then also, my job is to provide a sustainable program. My goals over the next year, you'll also see through my activities, as I really am looking to professionally get into work that looks at public policy and how that impacts early childhood. I am currently the assistant director of TARC's Tiny K department, which our Tiny K program is the third largest Tiny K program in the state, serving almost 900 families pre-COVID. My district work begins with work around positive, effective teaming and anti-bias, anti-racist work, diversity, equity, inclusion work. I decided, you'll see throughout other activities that I've done a lot of work on this year. I decided to pull it together so it could be replicated by other Tiny K coordinators, and had the opportunity to talk about that with at least one other coordinator so far. I participated in Greenbush's Leadership Academy, which was a great learning experience, and it gave me the opportunity to connect with current and former superintendents and building administrators, forming relationships to better build my mentoring pool. I'm the current president of the Tiny K Alliance. One of my jobs is to represent all 33 Tiny K programs to state leadership. Our state is a recipient of the Preschool Development Grant, and one of the initiatives from that grant was statewide screening. To do that, they have decided that each Tiny K program will administer the Ages and Stages questionnaire for their community. This caused some angst amongst Tiny K program coordinators. Our resources are very limited as it is, and so they were very concerned about the cost, both in running the program and staff time that it would take to do this well. It was my job to formulate questions and thoughts that could be communicated to the state leadership's team that expressed our willingness to work with them, but also to express points of view from local programs and what would need to be considered to make this initiative successful. I was able to sit in on Dr. Harwood, Frank Harwood, with USD 232 superintendent meeting. It was only one clinical hour, but it was really interesting to see what I would call the leadership standards in action as he outlined plans for the district. This is another piece of work that I have done as part of the Tiny K Alliance president. I submitted testimony to the House Social Services Budget Committee, which houses the infant toddler budget for the state. It's critical that we maintain our funding this year. The Tiny K Alliance hired a lobbyist and was able to increase our funding by $2 million last year. However, that funding has to be expended during this fiscal year in order for it to count in our maintenance of effort. Once those dollars go into our maintenance of effort, our funding is much more secure. So this is a very important funding year for us, and it happens at the same time as a very tight funding year due to COVID. Let's move on to elementary, early childhood. I was able to work with USD 232, two mentors, Andrea West and Dr. Swartz. They are building a new building called Cedar Trails Exploration Center that will house both their career and technical education as well as their early childhood. And so they wanted to come up with a mission statement that would represent both learning groups. Due to COVID, this was different than probably the way they had intended to do it by pulling stakeholders together. In order to support this work, we came up with a proposed mission statement that was then going to be shared with the leadership team and then given out for public comment. To do that, I researched mission statements and formed a word cloud. I thought that might be helpful during that meeting for us to sort of look at important words that reflect learning in those age groups. This really speaks to our positive, effective teaming work. I pulled a leadership team together, and we worked with a consultant, Matt Inyart, and looked at norms for our department. Came up with at TARC, we are a team that confidently and competently supports one another. In other words, our norms, and then activities that aligned with those norms. One of the biggest ongoing pieces of work that I did this year was to look at COVID, our policies and procedures, moving from in-home visits to teleintervention, and then from teleintervention back to in-home, and all of the things in between. I really had to balance what was educationally in the best interest for the well-being of every child, along with what was in the best interest of my staff and their health and safety. And so that has been a huge learning opportunity for me, and sort of an evolving process that we've worked on several times over this last year. This slide speaks again to our positive, effective teaming work. We developed a survey that was then handed out to every member of the department. We looked at that data across teams and department-wide, and so this link shows some of that data, and we were able to see some trends, some areas of improvement, and some strengths. One area that I focused on very heavily this year was diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to do that, I pulled a leadership team together that looked specifically at anti-bias and anti-racist work in early childhood and how that impacts our program. We developed a mission statement specific to this group, which is we will examine our biases, beliefs, and practices and how they impact our relationships with coworkers, work culture, and our service delivery to families to ensure that all children and families have access to an equitable and culturally responsive early intervention program. I'm very proud of that mission statement. I feel like it really reflects our ethics and our core values. And as that group has worked, we have often revisited that mission statement to make sure that our activities are in line with what we agreed to do. This is an example of working with a specific staff member to really look at formative and summative assessments and how to use that information to inform services, outcomes, and interventions. This activity, during COVID, as I mentioned, we switched to teleintervention as our service delivery option. I wanted to ensure that parents had an opportunity to give us feedback. And so we developed a survey, gathered the data, and then shared it out with staff on parents' impressions of teleintervention. This is an example of a community-wide presentation that I gave. As the Assistant Director for TARC Children's Services, I am often the one that interacts with our community. This was for our Early Childhood Collaborative, which functions as our local interagency coordinating council, made up of community partners, business leaders, and parents. This slide represents work that I did around our Medicaid revenue. There was a policy shift during COVID, which allowed us to increase our billing, and it was my job to explain those changes to our staff. And you can see down here with the graph that there was a definite increase from Q4 to Q1, which I can't entirely contribute to the training, but I do think the training, this shows that the training was successful and our staff were able to implement these billing procedures. Let's look at secondary work. As I said, I was able to, it was interesting because USC 232's early childhood and career and technical school was merging into one building, and so we were able to develop the mission statement listed below using collaborative work on both ends. It was a great process. I haven't had the opportunity to look at a mission statement before, and I learned a lot. Secondary work was a challenge for me due to the COVID restrictions of people going into buildings and the fact that my day-to-day work does not have any connection with the high school. So I did use this opportunity to submit one of my case studies. It was a case study on evaluations and some specific concerns that came out of that. I learned a lot from this, and as somebody that is in charge of staff evaluations, it was a great opportunity to reflect and think about what I would do in that situation. I have spent my career in special education, and so person first language is something that is very near and dear to my heart. And as I was listening to Dr. Swartz talk about what students would be experiencing and staff in the new Career and Exploration Center, I thought adapting a module that we did on person first language might be beneficial to them. This was probably my favorite secondary activity. I was able to look at competency-based instruction and competency-based learning. When districts were trying to figure out how they were going to deliver services during the next school year, competency-based learning was one of the projects that Greenbush was specifically involved in. And so I looked at it from the high school lens of looking at curricula and technology and how all of those things come together to support individual students. What was really interesting in the process was sort of learning those foundations actually influences my work in early childhood, because essentially we run a competency-based learning approach. Our interventions are highly integrated into daily activities, routines, and caregivers. And so we really look at overall functioning and the breadth and the depth of all of those activities to design our interventions. And so I was very surprised to see the alignment between the two, but I ended up learning a lot from this activity, or these activities. I submitted another case study looking at some 504 ADA needs for a student that had an injury. I participated in a Zoom meeting to talk with parents, bringing parents and business leaders together to talk about opportunities at the Career and Technical School. It was very informative. In fact, I was able to use that information to discuss some things with my own high schoolers, high school and college. And so it was a great opportunity to interact with parents in a professional manner very quickly and be responsive, and then be able to communicate that information back to Dr. Swartz so that she could follow up. I was also able to attend the staffing discussions of what that master schedule was going to look like for the new building. It was really an exercise in collaborative learning and leadership on the district's part, bringing two high schools together to essentially staff a new building. And so it was a great learning opportunity in leadership, because this is an adaptive challenge that is still continuing, I believe. I did have one observation day before COVID locked things down, and I was able to observe Mr. Ruff with DeSoto High School and his in-service with staff, really looking at how he interacts with staff, how he conveys his expectations and aligns, brings out what his instructional expectations are, but also in a supportive way, in a way that staff can bring questions and concerns to him. And that concludes my highlights. It's been a wonderful experience, and I'm very proud of this e-portfolio and the way it represents my learning during my time at Fort Hays State. So I hope that you enjoy looking through the artifacts, and I appreciate your time. Thanks, and have a great day.